Welcome back to my channel. I am your favorite mother of 3 bougie vintage, and today's video is about the ADHD marriage. So basically, a lot of my content recently has been about the things that I clearly could not talk about while I was still going through them. And obviously some stuff I am still technically going through because my divorce is not finalized. So I want to shed light on the ADHD marriage because this is something that I recognized was happening at the very end of my marriage, and my last ditch effort to save my marriage was recognizing that this was even an issue, that it was a thing. And I was like, well, how come nobody said anything about this before? So that is what I'm going to talk about today. Now, initially, I've already expressed to you guys that I didn't know what ADHD really was and how it affected people's day-to-day lives. I didn't know. I was very much ignorant because I thought ADHD and ADD were just like, oh, you have trouble maybe concentrating, you get distracted easily. I thought it was just that, but there's so much more that goes into it. And if it's something that is paired with other issues like PTSD or anxiety, other kinds of things that hinder your day-to-day life, then it can become really stressful. Now, because I didn't know what ADHD was, I think initially my personal feelings were, had I known what ADHD was early on in life, I would have probably looked at something like this sooner, or I would have recognized it sooner. But because I wasn't aware and I was just desperate to find out what is going on in my marriage, why is it falling apart, like what is happening here, on top of all the other issues that were there, initially felt like if I had known sooner that this was such a problem, because I knew that the ADHD was diagnosed, but I didn't know what it meant for somebody living with it, what it does to them, and how they can or cannot function with it if they are just coping and have coped their whole lives versus if they're treating it. So the first time that I read about having or being in an ADHD marriage, it was the first time I felt seen and heard. Like, it was describing a lot of what was happening in my life to a T. Verbal abuse aside, narcissism aside, it was describing a lot of what I was going through. It kind of gave me hope when I read about it, because I'm like, oh my God, this is fixable, you know? But it wasn't just the ADHD that was plaguing the marriage, so it really wasn't fixable, but it just basically gave me insight into why things were the way that they were. So I'm reading from a website called verywellmind.com, and the question here says, what are some of the ways symptoms of ADHD can disrupt a relationship? And so this can go for a romantic relationship, a friendship, a parent-child relationship, whatever it is. ADHD symptoms add consistent and predictable patterns to marriages in which one or both partners have ADHD. As long as the ADHD remains untreated or undertreated, these patterns can leave both partners unhappy, lonely, and feeling overwhelmed by their relationship. They may fight frequently or alternately disengage from each other to protect themselves from hurt. A common response for the non-ADHD partner is to become overly controlling and nagging, the only way to get anything done around here, while the ADHD partner becomes less and less engaged. Who wants to be with someone who is constantly angry? So in my situation in particular, I think in one of the last videos I did where I was talking about what I did wrong in the relationship, I talked about how I would have to stroke my ex's ego to just get the laundry taken downstairs. So I knew not to nag, and I didn't feel as though I did nag, but I was constantly told that I was nagging. And so it frustrated me because I'm like, I'm not nagging. I asked you to do something, it didn't get done, and I asked you to do it again, and it didn't get done. And so it's like, that's not nagging. It's like, nagging is if I'm constantly bothering you about something. If I have to do everything myself and I'm married and we have kids, like, it doesn't make any sense. And so you should be able to go to your partner and ask them to do something simple. And so I gave the example of the banana peel on the counter constantly being left there, and the issue was never resolved. In that situation, again, I'm being told I'm nagging my ex when he's constantly leaving the banana peel there after I've already asked him not to. And so I never really understood why I was being told that I was nagging. and it would frustrate me. And so we see that here as well. But I never used the term the only way to get anything done around here, because I respected that my spouse had a job. He worked outside of the home, so I got that. I understood that, and I took responsibility to do the things that you would typically expect a man to do, like take out the garbage. Because he wasn't home, I would just do it, and I stopped making a stink about it because I realized it doesn't even make any sense. It's not a big deal. Certain things I would have to take responsibility for, because if I asked for it to be done, it just wouldn't get done. But a lot of that has to do with the ADHD. It says here, if your relationship is impacted by ADHD, you may see any of the following patterns: chronic nagging or anger. If I said something simple, I would get snapped at, and then I would shut down. The anger was not coming from me. Only once I got fed up and was like, I can't do this anymore, do you see me be angry. But most of the time, I would just go and journal because I didn't want the conflict. The anger didn't come from me. Distribution of household tasks is wildly uneven. My ex didn't do any task around the house. Like I said, I would have to be like, oh, my sweet baby, can you bring the laundry down for me? Like, I would have to do that if he was home. He wanted to be left alone. Constantly said, leave me alone. Don't bother me. You know, I just want to sit here and play my video games. Obviously, that dynamic works if you don't have children, but once you have children, it doesn't work anymore. So you can't really tell your partner, if you're the person with ADHD, but you're not dealing with your diagnosis properly, you can't be constantly telling your partner, leave me alone, and you guys have children. Then the person that doesn't have ADHD is confused, like, well, what am I supposed to do with all these kids? And so I'm basically telling the children, like, okay, let's leave him alone. It was hurtful that way, you know, but a lot of that had to do with this diagnosis. There were no tasks that my ex did in the home. No cleaning. Every once in a while, he would cook if I requested something, because he is a chef and I enjoyed his food for the most part. So, you know, if he was home and was gonna cook, that would be cool. But that was really it. There was no cleaning, no taking care of the kids. If he was to take care of the kids, there would be issue about it, which I just could not understand. And so that was obviously one of the more frustrating things for me. But you couldn't ask him to take out the garbage. You couldn't ask him to shovel the driveway. You couldn't ask him to do anything. There would be an issue. And so I stopped. And that's why really a lot of married women feel like single moms, or feel like they're single if they're dealing with stuff like this, and they don't realize this person has ADHD and other issues that are not being dealt with. The only thing that my ex had to do on his own really was his laundry. He told us, don't touch it, and then would give me instructions to do it, and then I would do it, and then he would say, don't touch it again. It was just never ending. I was like, okay, I don't know what you want, so I'm just gonna leave it alone, child. I'm gonna leave it alone because I can't do this back and forth with you. It also says one spouse plays the role of always being responsible, a parent role. So this was me, which was frustrating, obviously, while the other is consistently inconsistent or irresponsible, a child role. I didn't realize our dynamic was that way until they started treating me like their mom. I was like, I don't want to raise you. I don't want to parent you. That's not what my, goal is here. That was never a thing for me. But I felt like because we had children that I had to stay on top of certain things. Like, you need to get a license. And they would refuse, or I'd get cussed out for saying it. And I'm like, you can't drive our kids around if you ain't got no damn license. You can't do it. And I'm being cussed out. And so I'm like, okay, like, what do you want me to do with this? It would just be little things like that. Like, that's really where the parent-child role came in, or saying, like, you can't leave your stuff around. Like, I'm already picking up after 3 children. Don't want to be picking up after a 4th one. So shoving wrappers into the couch is crazy. Leaving your banana peel is crazy. Like, these are little things that would be done constantly, and if you say anything about it, you're the bad guy. I didn't realize until I read the ADHD marriage thing that this was even what was going on. And when I read it, I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what's been happening. And so that's also why I was like, you know what? We need to go to counseling and we need to figure this out, because it shouldn't be like this. And there has to be a way to fix it because your coping strategies with the ADHD are not working. So, that's kind of why I was like on the last ditch effort to save the marriage. I had read about this and I'm like, whoa, this is fixable. So then it says your courtship was amazing and you couldn't get enough of each other. Now one partner just isn't paying attention at all. I don't know if I necessarily agree with this one in particular. I think once we started having kids, it really changed and it really kind of opened my eyes to what was actually going on, because prior to having children, for instance, I work from home. I've been working from home since like 2015. Because I worked from home, before we had kids, if I was, say, filming a video and he was playing video games, doing his own thing, I wasn't bothering him, he wasn't bothering me. I didn't realize he was emotionally unavailable. Once we had kids, and I would be doing the same thing now, only I'm working, and I was obviously making an F ton more money than he was for a while. Because we had children, like our first child, there would be videos you could find where I'm working and then he's bringing me the baby, or he would come and stand in where I'm working. So he would stand in the doorway holding the baby, like, can you take her? Instead of being daddy and figuring it out so that I could earn the money. I think a lot of that had to do with ADHD and not treating the ADHD and using coping strategies instead that were not really working once we had kids. So it didn't matter before because there was no baby there. He didn't bring me a child while I was working. He would just leave me alone so that I could work. But once we had children, he would constantly be disrupting my work and not helping me and, making it even so that I could do what I do from home. Because I always used to say to him, I was like, you couldn't, because this obviously went on for the last 4 years. So I'm like, I couldn't just pick up the children, put them in the car because I'm working from home, and drive them to you and leave them at your work doorstep. I couldn't do that. So please have that same respect for me. But obviously they felt like their job was superior to my job because I am self-employed technically and I can afford to stop working, whereas he can't bring his kids to work. And I'm like, my whole point is I wouldn't do it. And I don't think it's fair that you do it. You take advantage of the fact that I work from home. That's not fair. It's still work. It's still bringing in money. You know what I mean? So just that reciprocity, it was just so unfair. And it's almost like somebody with ADHD may not have the patience, because I exude a lot of patience, obviously, or some people with ADHD do not have the patience it takes to raise children. And you need patience to raise children. You can't just drop them off whenever they're inconveniencing you. Like, that's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to the mom, it's not fair to the dad, it's not fair to the children. Because obviously, because I am home 24/7, my kids have access to me 24/7. So like when their father would be home, they just want him. They didn't even really want me, but they didn't have a choice. The next thing says you argue all the time, even over stupid things. This was definitely it. Most of the times, the arguments would start because of the tone of voice that he would talk to me with. And I would be like, you cannot talk to me like that. And it would just be a back and forth. Like, I think I have a journal entry where I'm like, I really wish you wouldn't be so rude or have an attitude with me all the time. And he said to me, so you don't want me to be myself. And I was like, at that point, that was like 2 years ago. I was like, at that point, should have really been the eye opener for me. And it was eye opening, but it just didn't, peel my eyes back and tape them open. But it was still shocking to me. That's why I had written it down, because I was like, whoa, like, what do you mean? This is who you are? Disrespecting me is who you are? That's crazy. Next point says, one partner doesn't seem to remember agreements well or is tuned out. That happened all the time. One partner has great trouble following through on things that have been agreed to. Very much so. Sexual relationship has broken down. This was like, it was ridiculous. Okay. Actually, because I am actually quite sensual and I have needs, obviously, like I did Adam and Eve for so long, obviously I'm very sexual. But if you're with somebody that's not on your same libido vibration, girl, it's highly problematic. If you're constantly arguing, or if you have that parent-child dynamic, you're not even trying to do that. So it definitely becomes a problem in the marriage. And I also feel like if you are married, you should be having sex all the time. And I don't mean like 3 times a day, 7 days a week, but at least once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. Girl, give me 4 times a week and I'll be happy. But not once in a freaking blue moon. Like, that should never be a thing if you're married. I feel like when you're married, sex is such a like spiritual connection. So even in the Bible, it tells you to be having sex, stop to pray, then have sex again after you pray. Like, it says stuff like that in the Bible. And so you should always be making love to your partner. It shouldn't just be when we can. You shouldn't have to schedule it. It should just be, I'm turned on, come jump on me. You know what I mean? Like, that's how it should be. But unfortunately, that's not how it was. The unfortunate result is that the divorce and marital dysfunction rates for couples affected by ADHD is almost double that of couples not impacted by ADHD. And so when I read that too, it was like, okay, well, if this is such a big issue because it's untreated and the coping mechanisms are no longer working because we have a family that we're raising, we have to go get you help, because I don't want my marriage to end. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to put my kids through that. I don't want a custody battle. I don't want all these things. Like, it's just inconvenience, okay? So I'm trying to avoid these things at all costs. I'm like doing research. I'm doing the most, okay? But like I said, there was so many other issues that it didn't even matter. I think a big part of it too, I'm trying to convince myself that the marriage was salvageable when it wasn't. It says, what is it like to be an ADHD spouse in marital crisis? So this is speaking to the ADHD person's mind. There's a spectrum of ADHD symptoms. Some people have no trouble with ADHD in one or more realms of their life, such as at work. So I always talk about how he excels at his job. He's like the best at his job. Like, he does great there. But have difficulty in others, such as relationships. Those with the most severe symptoms find that ADHD interferes with just about everything. Among other things, a person with ADHD who is in a troubled marriage may feel secretly or overtly overwhelmed, since keeping daily life under control when you have ADHD takes much more work than others realize. So that's why the video games were, which I didn't know at first, were a coping mechanism, because there's something called hyper-focusing, which he can do. But if he's hyper-focusing on the video games, don't you dare disrupt it. Don't you dare disrupt it, girl. Okay, don't walk in front of the TV. Don't talk to him because he's not even listening. Like, don't bother him, okay? Subordinate to a spouse who is running things, particularly if parent-child dynamics are in place. So that was obviously the case here. Unloved or unwanted because he or she keeps hearing the message that he should change or do better. I'm definitely guilty of saying you gotta do more around here. Like, you gotta do better because we're on a sinking ship. I'm a pilot and I have my driver's license, but I don't have my pilot's license. I'm not even a pilot. What's the boat person called? The sailor? I am not a sailor, okay? And we're on a sinking ship. We are going down faster. I'm gonna need you to get it together. So I'm definitely guilty of that. But again, I'm not even aware that the ADHD is the reason that this person is just impossible. I'm frustrated because I'm like, how you have these kids and I'm supposed to do everything? My driveway is huge, like massive. He would only shovel half of it, the side that the car was on. And I'm just like, you're not doing anything else around the house, so why wouldn't you just shovel the whole driveway? Like, that's crazy to me. Like, there was a time that I was so frustrated about the driveway. I'm like 8 months pregnant and I'm outside shoveling the driveway, busting a sweat because he was supposed to do it and it wasn't getting done and I could not wait any longer. Like, I needed the driveway shoveled because it's salted. I needed to be able to walk outside of my house and go on the driveway. We're the only house on the whole entire neighborhood that driveway wasn't shoveled. And it was almost embarrassing to see it. And so me at 8 months pregnant, I'm outside. He sat inside playing video games. And I'm obviously frustrated because I'm big pregnant, okay? But like, I wasn't going to sit around and wait forever because it had been days and days and days that it hadn't been done for. And so I put on my gear. He didn't stop me. He didn't, stop playing his video game and come outside and shovel the driveway, take the shovel for me, nothing. I was out there sweating, okay? When I came inside, my clothes were soaked because I was out there doing labor while I am supposed to be getting ready to give birth. Okay, well, I'm supposed to get ready to be in labor. I'm outside laboring, shoveling this massive driveway when there's a man in the house. What? Girl, no. the ghetto. Afraid to fail again is the next point. As a relationship worsens, typical ADHD inconsistency contributes to anxiety about what may happen the next time one fails. And this was something that was verbalized, so I already knew that they were feeling that way. The last point says different. People with ADHD understand that the world doesn't work for them in the same way that it does for others. Their minds are often racing, noisy, or cluttered, and so they see and experience the world in ways that others often don't relate to well. One young man described his ADHD brain as having the Library of Congress in your head with no card catalog. I mean, it's tough. And so when I read this stuff, I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that you were going through all these things. And so I sent an apology text. Like, I am so sorry. I had no idea that ADHD was what it was. Like, let's get you the help you need. Let's blah, 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 blah. But like, that happens a lot when you're dealing with narcissism as well. You, as the person on the receiving end of the hurtful things, you apologize for things that you really shouldn't be apologizing for. But I was really just apologizing because I was showing him empathy, that I didn't know you were going through that as ADHD. I didn't know what it was. And I'm sorry that I hadn't been even more patient than I already had been. I'm sorry that I didn't do that for you and I didn't make it any easier. But at the same time, it was like I was putting my feelings on the back burner once again, because my feelings were always being invalidated. And I was doing it to myself a lot of the time. I was invalidating my own feelings because I was feeling bad for him when I should have been not doing that. When you are in a relationship with somebody, whether it's your friend, your parent, your spouse, whatever, if you're constantly having to put your feelings on the back burner to cater to their feelings, that is a toxic relationship and you need to address it and cut it off. And I didn't know why I was doing it either. I didn't even realize that I was doing it. It's only once you come out of some things that you realize, oh damn, I was putting how I felt on the back burner because I was feeling a lot of things, but I was trying to make sure that he was happy. But I realized too that your happiness has to come from within. Like, that's why even in the midst of all these things, I was never feeling unhappy per se. Like, I never spoke that into myself. I never said, I'm unhappy. Unhappy in the marriage, but I wasn't unhappy with myself. Like, I know what kind of person I am. I know who I am. I can identify myself in a lineup. So I never felt unhappy within. I just felt unhappy outwardly in the marriage, but I never really even vocalized that because I obviously have a great relationship with God and I know where my happiness comes from. And I know that somebody else cannot get, if you can't be happy by yourself, you can't be happy anywhere. And so that was kind of one of the dynamics. I'm happy internally, happy with myself, happy with who I am, happy with who I was as a person, but my ex was not happy with himself. He was miserable with himself. And so he is projecting and deflecting and gaslighting and doing all these things because he's unhappy with himself. And he's putting those things on me and trying to tell me that I'm unhappy. But I wasn't unhappy with myself. And when it actually came to the marriage, it didn't really register to me that I was unhappy in the marriage either. I thought that we were just a couple going through some things. Like, you're with somebody for 10 years, you're not going to not go through some things. So I'm not thinking that there was anything that we would ever come up against that we couldn't get to fixing and grow old together and all those things. So that's where my head was at. So it's not registering to me that whatever I'm feeling in the unhappiness side of things was going to be a forever thing. I'm thinking it's temporary. This too shall pass. You know, that's where my head was at because, like I said, I have a great relationship with God. So that's where, you know, that's just how my thought processes were. But it was so much deeper than that. And I wasn't ready to even come into, I guess, full alignment with what that meant. So the next question is, what about the non-ADHD partner? What is helpful for the ADHD partner to understand about the experiences of his or her non-ADHD partner? Now, this question can apply if you're just dealing with ADHD, but if you're dealing with ADHD and you're also dealing with narcissism, it's not going to matter because the person that is the narcissist in the relationship is not going to be able to empathize with the spouse that is either non-ADHD or ADHD, because only what matters to them is what matters. What matters to you is not important to somebody that has narcissistic traits or tendencies. As with the ADHD spouse, the non-ADHD experience runs along a spectrum from mildly problematic to unmanageable. At the milder end of the spectrum is a spouse who finds herself surprised and unhappy that her ADHD husband isn't paying much attention to her. I definitely dealt with that. At the unmanageable end is a partner who feels completely overburdened by the responsibilities she has assumed because she thinks her spouse can't do them. I think I definitely fell into this category. She dislikes herself and her husband and is chronically angry and frustrated by her plight. That I don't agree with. I was never disliking me, child. I love me some me, okay? But because I was dealing with narcissism, I was disliking who I was becoming through being gaslit all the time, and my reactions becoming more and more toxic, and like I'm not understanding myself, I'm losing myself, and slowly becoming what my sister says, you just become like a shell of yourself and there's nothing inside. That's really what I was disliking. I was disliking that I was becoming unrecognizable to myself when things would happen to me, and I would be reacting negatively because I wasn't given a chance to react in a healthy way, because 9 times out of 10 it would be I'm reacting to something that was lied about. The non-ADHD partner's experience is generally a progression from happy to confused to angry to hopeless. He or she might feel lonely because her spouse is too distracted to pay any attention. I was so alone, girl. Like I was definitely that. I was lonely, but that's why I just turned to God, because there was nothing I could do. Like, what am I going to do if my spouse is deciding that after his shift, he's just not going to come home. He's just going to stay at work and drink and have fun with the people at work. And, you know, family life is just out of the question. What was I supposed to do? So I was very much lonely. I would go to bed by myself a lot. Angry and emotionally blocked. Anger at the untreated ADHD's partner's inability to change their interactions or follow up on responsibilities can permeate many interactions. In an effort to control this, a non-ADHD partner may bottle it up inside. So I am completely aware of self. I know that I don't bottle my emotions. What I do is journal so that I'm not holding resentment. And that's a big part of the reason why I ended up filling my journals up, because there was so much happening all the time and I had to get it out because I didn't want to feel resentment towards my ex. I didn't want to be upset with him. I didn't want to hate him. So I would just pray about it and have hope that, you know, God was going to turn it around. God was going to speak to him, you know, fix it, Jesus. And so that's really where my head was at. And so that's the other thing too. When people had come to me and had tried to ask me, like, what did you do wrong in the relationship? And I'm like, listen, if you guys really understood what was going on here, like if there was a camera in here 24/7 and displaying the dynamic, what was happening, you really couldn't ask me that question, because I put my best foot forward, and it wasn't being received. I feel like most of the things that I did wrong were in my reactions to the BS that I was dealing with. And I'm so forgiving and so easy freaking going when I'm being met with such difficulties. Instead of getting mad about it, I would just take it to God, because I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the energy to fight about it. I didn't have the energy to do anything. I felt like I couldn't do anything about it. I felt like I was out of control. So I would just write it down, because what else could I do? You know, I just felt like there was nothing I could do. So instead of bottling it up inside and then exploding, I wrote it down and just almost forgot about it. So that's why a lot of times I'm shocked by my journal entries, because I'm like, this happened. And so when I read it back, I relive it. But at the same time, I'm like, wow, I forgot about that, because I don't hold things against people. Like, that's just me, you know? And so even when it came to the video that I did on his mother, all the things that have happened in the last 10 years, I never held them against her. I never did. I take them down, you know, I forgive. I allowed her back into my space on multiple occasions, even though she violated my life on many occasions. She violated me, but I allowed her back in again and again and again and again, until the point where I realized, like, you can't keep letting her back in because she's poisonous. So you have to draw the line somewhere. And that's pretty much just the type of person that I am. And the same thing goes with even my father. Over the last 30 years, since the time I was a child, my father had done things that were not okay. And I would forgive him every once in a while, you know, see if he's grown or changed, just because he was my father. And I'm growing and changing, so I have the capacity to love him if he's lovable. But then I would let him back in. And most recently, as last year, you know, I let him back in and he violates again. And so that was the last time. That would be the last time. You just have to learn how to deal with people accordingly. And that's kind of where I'm at with everybody. I forgive, I don't forget, I don't hold it against you, but I'm not gonna allow you back into my space at this point in my life. Stressed out is the next point. Too many responsibilities, not enough help, obviously that. And too much anger can make the relationship toxic for a non-ADHD partner. So honestly, if I didn't have my mom to give me the balance that my ex couldn't give me, then I would probably be in a worse state. I wouldn't be able to come and talk to you guys still, because I'd be sat on my bed depressed or something. But because my mom had always been there from the very beginning, before the babies were even born, picking up the slack, it made my life run smoothly. And that's all she ever tried to do, just help us navigate and make things easier for us as a couple, as parents especially. But again, those were things that weren't received, and my mom couldn't understand it either, because she's like, listen, I bend over backwards for y'all, okay? I be doing the most for y'all. I take care of your kids for you. Like, I do a lot, and the attitude and resentment that is towards me, and it's almost like she was resented for just being loving, you know? And I couldn't wrap my head around it. She couldn't wrap her head around it. And so in turn, because the people that love you are the ones that are going to hold you accountable. So I'm sat there holding him accountable. My mom sat there holding him accountable, but because he lacks accountability, he doesn't receive it that way. He feels attacked. And so there would be times I would be like, listen, I'm on your side. I am not attacking you. It's not an attack. And he would joke and be like, it's an attack. And I'd be like, no, it's not an attack. I'm telling you because I love you. Like, I'm telling you because I want you to, you know, be the best version that you can be, not just for me, but for our kids. Like, you know what I mean? And so when somebody is feeling attacked, there's nothing you can say that's going to change their mind about what you're saying to them, even if it's constructive. I'm giving constructive criticism. I'm not sat here saying you're a fat ass wallaby. You don't do nothing around here. Like, that's not the attitude that I had. And so that's why I'm saying I tried so many different approaches, but nothing was going to, you know, fix this thing. The last point here says that exhausted, hopeless, and sad. And this was me. At the end of the relationship, I was all of these things. I was exhausted, I was hopeless, and I was very sad because my biggest fear was coming true, which was having to get a divorce after having children. That was my biggest fear. That's why I always verbalized from the time I was like 18. I'm telling my mom, I'm not having kids and I'm not getting married because ew. It can be a real struggle living with a person who is not managing their ADHD. After a while, the repetitive nature of how unmanaged ADHD symptoms show up in the relationship leads to feelings as if nothing will ever change. So this is actually an interview with somebody that wrote a book about this stuff. So this next question says, in your book, you talk about the destructive symptom response cycle. Can you explain what that is, the ways it can be hurtful in a relationship, and how to break this negative pattern? So the answer is, a tendency is to blame ADHD symptoms for all the problems in the marriage, but this is not the case. Both partners play important roles in their marital distress. So this is not the article that I had originally read, but after I read the article, that's why I apologized, because I was like, oh, okay, well, it can't all be on him. Some of it has to be on me too. But I'm the understanding person. So I apologize. I, said, let's try to fix this. Let's try to work on this, blah, 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 blah. ADHD symptoms create unexpected, often insidious stresses on a marriage, as well as many misunderstandings. The destruction comes from the full pattern, though. One that includes the symptoms, the response to the symptoms, and then the response to the response. And so this was obviously a big issue. A classic example is around the symptom of distraction, one of the most prevalent and important symptoms of ADHD. A distracted ADHD partner often is simply not paying any attention to his or her spouse. If the spouse doesn't know about ADHD, then she will likely interpret the lack of attention as he doesn't care about me anymore. And I would definitely say that I felt that way. She becomes progressively more resentful at his lack of attention and starts to be short or angry with him. That, though, did not happen. When I felt that way, I'm a communicator, so I would verbalize that. I would be assured that that wasn't the case, but then there would be no action to back it. So I'm like, okay, you need to make up your mind, child, because this don't make no damn sense. It says she becomes progressively more resentful at his lack of attention, starts to be short and angry with him. He hears the anger but doesn't know its origin, so is hurt and angered by her anger. And so because I wasn't approaching him like this is saying, I would more so say that if I were to raise an issue, instead of the issue being dealt with, I would be yelled at for raising the issue. Again, going back to the banana peel, it's the easiest example for me to give at this point. Obviously, my need, which I'm communicating, is don't make it harder for us to manage the home, because I'm already picking up after the kids. It's your banana peel. There's no need for you to eat the banana peel over the garbage and then leave the banana peel above the garbage. That makes no sense. If I press that issue, I get yelled at for pressing it for the 500th time, because I don't feel like I should have to say it more than once, twice, 3 times. Like, how many times does somebody need to address some things? Because then it feels like the person is doing it on purpose. And somebody actually commented that and said sometimes it's a control thing, which is exactly what it felt like, because we weren't only dealing with ADHD. And they head into a downward reinforcing cycle. In that instance, it was like, if I'm pressing the issue about the banana peel, instead of dealing with that banana peel issue, they are then angry with me for bothering them about the banana peel instead of just throwing out the banana peel. Why are you talking to me? Is the attitude that I was being met with. Why are you talking to me about the banana peel? Just throw it out. Like, as if to minimize my issue. On the other hand, if the couple does know about the ADHD, an ignored spouse can say, you've been distracted lately and I'm feeling lonely. Can we go out on a date and spend some time together? So this was another big issue. Do you see me? Do you see me? I am trying to, first of all, because of COVID, obviously there was a lot of issues. Like, I wasn't getting vaccinated or whatever, so I couldn't go out for a while. But then once they lifted those things, I was ready to be taken out, wined and dined again. But it wasn't happening. And I was being told that I'm like intruding and like wanting too much of their time, when literally we barely would see each other because they were always at work or not coming home at a decent time to where I'm even seeing them. Like, and so I was like, you're just saying stuff. Like, you're not even making any sense at this point. And so this was a big issue. I'm feeling like neglected almost, And so if I say that, hey, you're neglecting me, I'm being told I'm nagging them to go out. And I'm like, we are supposed to be going out at least once a week, chap. Like, what? You can see how fully understanding the situation and responding in a way that acknowledges the presence of ADHD symptoms makes a big difference. But don't misunderstand me. The symptom is at the beginning of the cycle, so the symptoms need to be managed or worked around if a troubled couple is to improve their relationship for the long term. Question: you also explain to couples that it is not a matter of trying harder, but trying differently. And so this is something that I read on a different article. What does this mean? And so that's where my head was at as well. I was like, okay, well, in terms of the ADHD, everything else aside, we've been doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. We're not going to get any different results, so we have to tackle this differently. And so it was really one-sided, because I'm like, I'm willing to put in the work, I'm willing to forgive and move on and move forward and do what we need to do to keep our family together, because why should we break up our home if we don't have to. If there's issues there that can be dealt with in therapy and all those things, then, you know, let's be responsible human beings, adults, because our kids did not ask to come here. So let's try to fix those things if there's still love there, you know? And so I was willing to do whatever, do the work, go to therapy, go get him on medication, whatever we needed to do so that my kids can have the life that they deserve and the life that I deserved as well. So the answer to that question says you can take your knowledge about ADHD and choose tactics that will help you succeed. I call these ADHD sensitive tactics. For example, just trying harder to remember to do a chore sometimes in the future probably won't work because the symptom distraction will get in the way of the chore and may well be forgotten. On the other hand, setting an alarm on your cell phone that reminds you of the chore at the time that it needs to get done will probably work very well, unless you hit the snooze button now. The ADHD spouse may be distracted in the interim, but the alarm brings the chore back into his or her mind at just the right time. And I think that that's fair. Like, if you're dealing with this exact issue right now where you're dealing with, you know, somebody that has ADHD and you don't have ADHD, as a couple, I feel like you should find a solution together. You know, it shouldn't just be one couple parenting and the other couple childing. Okay. I feel like you should be able to come together and be like, okay, let's try this method and see if it works. Like, let's do the alarm thing. And if we do the alarm thing and there's still an issue there, then, well, we got to go back to the drawing board, because you can't be setting the alarm to take out the trash and then you're pressing snooze and you're like, I'll do it in 5 minutes, and then it never gets done. For couples who are still struggling with the ADHD effect in their relationship, but who are understanding more about the patterns that are occurring, what are some key points that they need to know in order to move forward, repair, and rebuild their marriage? So the answer is, this is a two-person effort, which obviously I knew. You both must take responsibility for your own issues and changes in order to succeed. Conversely, you cannot be responsible for your partner's changes, including whether or not to try medication for ADHD. And so this is definitely somewhere where I went very wrong, because I had constantly been encouraging to try medication because the ADHD was out of control. And they didn't want the medication because they were stuck on, when they were a child, the sedation that they felt while they were on it. And I'm like, this is a different time. They have so many other things. But I was only really willing to go forward if medication wasn't involved. And not even for the actual relationship with me, but the one with my kids. Because I realized that there was such a big issue there, that's really why I wanted the medication, because the patience, and there was just a lack there that I didn't feel they deserved. So I'm like, we have to try everything. And if that doesn't work, then hey, let's throw in the towel. Like, literally, I said that. I said, we will try everything and get to the bottom of this thing, and then we'll throw in the towel. But that didn't end up happening. But I definitely was like, you need to try something, champ, because this is not gonna work. Like, this is not working. I basically was like, the coping strategies are not working. And he had already been told that he can get medication, but he didn't want the medication. And so for the sake of our children, I was like, you need to be medicated. Like, you actually need to be medicated. So gotta do something here. And it could be a thing where the medication doesn't work, but I was just like, as a trial, try something different. You've not done it. You're getting old. You know, you have to be present for the babies. So let's do something different. But here it says that you cannot be responsible for your partner's changes, including whether or not to try medication. And so this is, I guess, back to the parent-child dynamic, telling my ex, you need to be medicated, because everybody around them, with the exception of the people at work, are suffering in their presence because they don't have healthy coping mechanisms and they needed to be medicated. But if they don't want to be medicated to better the lives of the people that are supposed to matter most, so your children, your spouse, etc., then what can you do? And really, I'm learning that you cannot force somebody to take medication. So this is why going forward, like when I'm dating again, if somebody tells me they have ADHD, it's just not something I'm willing to put up with. And that's okay. Well, especially if it's untreated and they're unmedicated and they need medication, like something like that. Like I'm not even willing to freaking bother because I've experienced it and it wasn't pleasant for me. And I also don't want to have to be encouraging you to do the thing that's going to be best for you. I don't think that that's fair for either party. Like I don't think it was fair for me to be saying you need to do this, but it's only because I'm on the receiving end of them not doing it that I'm even saying that. But like it really wasn't realistic. And so I can look back and be like, well, this says that I shouldn't have been doing that, but I was desperate. It says, learn everything you can about how different you are and what your partner's experience is. It will give you greater empathy, patience, and even motivation. And so again, back to the apology, I apologized when I realized, oh man, but obviously at that point, I was still willing to work on the relationship. Because what I felt like was that the abuse was happening because of the ADHD. But when I was in therapy, my therapist had explained to me, she's like, we have to be careful with that because there's lots of people that have the ADHD symptoms that aren't abusive. And then there's people that are abusive that don't have ADHD. So they can coexist. That you don't have to have, just because you have ADHD doesn't mean you're going to be abusive. Once she told me that, I was like, oh, okay, well, moving on. So then it says, optimize the ADHD treatment. Medications alone won't do it. I write about the 3 legs of treatment for ADHD partner in my relationship book. And while it's too much to cover here, I suggest couples think of in terms of a prolonged approach to treatment. So I knew that, though. I knew medication was going to fix it. I said you need medication and therapy and couples counseling. So individual therapy, couples therapy, medication, and Jesus, okay? A little bit of Jesus. Okay, a little bit of Jesus never hurt nobody, all right? So, that's really where my head was at with it. I knew it wasn't just going to be the medication's going to fix things. You have to be willing to do the work, especially in a marriage of any kind. Think about improving your relationship rather than saving your marriage. This will keep you focused on what's really important, how the two of you relate to each other rather than on the logistics of your relationship. Logistics would be who is doing what, and where most troubled marriages are focused. Ultimately, marriage is about joy. As you work through the 6 steps for rebuilding your relationship, remember to find something to celebrate or laugh about as often as possible. Set a time to create joy, not just time to fix things. You both need relief from the effort it takes to change habits that have been built up for years, which is also something that I was aware of. Once I started to research the ADHD stuff and I, brought it to my ex's attention, it just had me looking at things in a whole other light, but it wasn't enough. I feel like if you're in a marriage with somebody that does have ADHD, or if you are the ADHD partner, doing the research about it is really important, because I felt like if I had known earlier, we would have probably not ended up in the place that we would have ended up in. But at the same time, because it wasn't just ADHD that we were dealing with, that we were probably going to end up in the crazy place that we ended up in anyway. So yeah, it was interesting to learn about ADHD and see it in a different light. And I feel like more people should be talking about how ADHD does affect your relationships, and how a lot of the time you're not going to notice that these things are issues until after you go through life and have children with somebody that has ADHD, because you see how it's affecting the children, negatively impacting them, by having somebody that is not able to give them even a little bit of time, and it can be hurtful for you to watch and witness. That's why in the red flag video, I brought up ADHD, because it ended up being a major red flag, because I was ignorant and didn't research ADHD because I thought I knew what it was. But the truth was I had no idea what ADHD was. And I'm still learning about ADHD. It's something that is hereditary. So if you do have children with somebody that has ADHD, you're possible to have a child that has ADHD, and then there's that. And so dealing with a parent or a spouse that has ADHD, and then having a child that has ADHD, once you become aware of what ADHD is in your spouse, you can then tackle it in your child and understand your child better, and not be you know, impatient or frustrated with your child that has ADHD and might also have other issues going on there as well. So it's been quite eye-opening and a learning experience, and I'm happy to share it with you guys and, you know, teach you guys a little something something. Anyway, you guys, I need to go eat. I have Bougie Village soon. I love you all so much, and I'll definitely see you in the next one.